Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the reports that Liz Truss is looking at a review of workers' rights in order to make us more competitive. Making us more competitive is Tory speak for lowering standards and freedoms. I'll be discussing how this is yet another long-predicted consequence of Brexit, but also how this might actually be the Tories' equivalent of the Roe versus Wade blunder by their counterparts in the USA's Republican Party. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So yeah, according to a report in the Times, the limit on working hours, paid leave, working conditions, all up for destruction. We said this years ago. The reason the Tories wanted to leave the EU could essentially be broken down into four main policy areas. First, so that they could avoid paying taxes. The EU were implementing rules that made it harder to dodge taxes. These pretend patriots squirrel away their money in offshore tax havens in order to avoid paying UK taxes, which means there's less money to pay for UK public services. Second, to reduce environmental standards. We've also seen this since Brexit. The government promised that it would champion environmental standards in its trade deals around the world. The reality is they've dropped them all. Third, human rights. They've also dropped human rights from their trade negotiations and deals. In addition, they are openly talking about getting rid of the Human Rights Act and removing ourselves from the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights, which I remind people has nothing to do with the EU, other than the fact that the EU are also members. They've also made peaceful protest illegal in the UK just before summer, although the protests to come may be less than peaceful if the government don't start waking up to the problems they have inflicted upon the country. And fourth, they would want to remove workers' rights. When Boris Johnson took over from Theresa May and he was tinkering with the withdrawal agreement, he moved environmental protections and workers' rights away from the legally binding portion of the agreement. Why are you doing that, Prime Minister? He was asked. Are you planning on trashing those standards then when we leave the EU? Oh, no, replied Johnson. In fact, we want to strengthen them. Now, anyone who knew anything about Brexit knew this was a lie. The EU only set minimum standards. They don't set absolute standards. It's not like this is the standard. This is the number of days paid leave workers need and so on. It's minimum standards. You can't go below them. You can go above them. Any member of the EU can at any time raise their own personal standards. In fact, quite a few countries do. In some areas, the UK even had higher standards. Not by no means all. So what was the justification for taking these standards out of the legally binding agreement? There could only be one. They wanted to go lower than these standards. And here we are. Liz Truss is to review workers' rights. She wants to make us more competitive. Tories see workers' rights, things like paid annual leave, maximum working hours, as a barrier to competitiveness. They quite literally think that having a nation of slaves would be the best model. They know they can't fully go that far, but they do look at envy at any country where human rights do not exist. And the lexiteers have been rightly getting stick for this as well. Those on the left of politics who backed Brexit out of ignorance. Whenever you ask them, well, why did you back it? They always claim that the EU prevents certain policies like, oh, you can't nationalise public services. It's like, that's nonsense. I mean, you name a public service and there'll be an EU country where it is actually, in actual fact, nationalised. The fallacy comes from Tory propaganda. When the EU came into being, the Tories rushed to privatise everything that wasn't nailed down. Part of the excuse was, oh, it's not really consistent with these new EU rules, you see, we need to privatise them all. But it was all lies. You didn't see the same behaviour amongst the rest of the EU, did you? EU member states all rushing to sell off their national assets to the lowest bidder. No, that was largely us. And this is the problem. These boneheads were reading Tory propaganda, but they didn't recognise it as Tory propaganda. We've seen the same thing in the last few years, like Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson, privately educated millionaire spivs who somehow convinced down-to-earth workers that they were on their wavelength. It's been a con job from the start. What the EU brought was standards on transparency, environmental protections, human rights and workers' rights. When Tories talk about EU red tape and rules, that's what they're talking about. All things that benefit ordinary working people, but are a pain in the arse for rich taskmasters come slavers. Mind you, no point in getting mad about it, because it's done. It would be nice if more people could see that everything we warned about is coming to pass, one grim forecast at a time. But I'd rather focus on the turnips in charge than the turnips who are never going to be in charge. If Truss does this, it could actually be a monumental political mistake. I mentioned at the start that this could be their Roe versus Wade blunder. Now, at the start of the year, Republicans looked in decent shape to take back some control in this year's midterms. It was looking a bit ropey for the Democrats. Then the Republican-packed Supreme Court decided to remove abortion rights from the list of what had been accepted as basically constitutional rights. Now, everyone knew that this was what the Republicans wanted, and they lost no time in making abortions illegal for any purpose in their states. In fact, some states started this legislative process before the Supreme Court even announced their ruling in preparation, because they didn't want to lose a second. They were that eager for it. They were just that eager for it. They didn't think it through. There was no strategy. For example, recently, a 10-year-old rape victim was denied an abortion. She was able to get one in a more forward-looking state, but Republicans wanted to stop that. If it was up to them, you wouldn't be able to do it anywhere in the country. But it was a politically bad move. It has outraged a lot of the country. The Democrats are now pointing out that if people let the Republicans win even more power, they can expect to see even more of this behaviour. There was what we'd call a by-election in New York recently. Don't know what they call it. We'd call it a by-election. The Republican candidate was absolutely nailed on to win, but the Democrat candidate stood on a platform of defending abortion rights and ended up winning the seat. Well, attacking workers' rights could do the same for the Tories. Not that the Tories were nailed on to win the next election, but this policy could see them make that loss more certain and even heavier. Politically, a review is potentially worse than actually removing workers' rights as well. Because if Liz Truss holds her review, let's say she holds a review early next year and then removes those workers' rights shortly afterwards, late next year, early the following year, people will have lost some rights, okay? Their rights will have gone down. It might be a reduction in paid leave. It might be the complete abolition of paid leave. It might be raising the cap on hours worked per week. Who knows? Could be anything. If the Tories do that, Labour have an easy line of attack, because there are tens of millions of workers who could be affected. The Tories built their current power base on appealing to many of these workers as well. I mean, these workers have already had it tough, working hard, and their money, isn't enough to even pay for a basic standard of living at the moment, and it's going to get worse in many cases. They already like Labour's idea of freezing energy prices. Imagine what they'd think of the Tories taking away their rights and Labour promising to not only put them right back, but strengthen them as well. But let's say this review just hangs over our heads. So let's say she doesn't actually implement anything. Let's say they go, okay, look, this is going to be really bad. It's making it easy for Labour to attack us now. If you implement a drop in workers' rights, that'll be a bit of a problem with our voters, right? So let's say she does nothing before the election. She intends to do it after the election. This could be even better for Labour, because every single worker right that exists is potentially up for the chop until that review is completed and the action's implemented. Every single one. So it could well be that, let's say you just talk it as a number counting exercise. Let's say that Liz Truss removes 30% of worker rights, just let's say. With the review, though, if she doesn't actually do it, Labour can claim that she might be getting rid of 100% of our rights after the election. Makes it a very easy line of attack for Labour. Because the problem for Labour has been, up until now, it's been tricky to focus on particular platforms. You can't spread yourself out too much. When it comes to a campaign, you need a very small number of platforms to stand on. Like people, for example, polling shows that people say they're not really sure what Starmer's Labour stands for, which is a very reasonable conclusion to draw. But it's a consequence of Labour not wanting to commit to a particular campaign when there's still years to go before the election. Because they need a couple of platforms that chime with voters. Remember, in 2019, the Tories had two platforms. Get Brexit done, level up. That was it. You can't afford to have too much. Labour needs something. And it's hard to predict what that's going to be in advance. Like, you might pick something that's, a real big issue now, but in a few years' time, it might not be. Well, the thing is, it's not difficult to predict anymore now, is it? Because thanks to the Tories, Labour have got two really obvious lines now. The first is, of course, the cost of living crisis. I mean, right now it's energy, and that will remain a major issue right up until the election. But it includes other things as well. People are not getting a decent day's pay for an honest day's toil compared with the cost of living. And that's not going to change before the election. Labour can safely go hard on this platform, absolutely certain in the knowledge that it will still be a major issue at the next election because the Tories are ideologically incapable of dealing with it. But second, they can also now go hard on workers' rights because the cat's out the bag. Even if Truss denies wanting this review, even if she doesn't now launch the review before the election, everyone will see she wants it. Labour can say that she's just trying to get to the election, then she'll unleash this bonfire of rights and freedoms with 5 years to get it all done. By the end, there could be nothing left. In America, they'll say workers do not have the right to any paid annual leave. None at all. Labour can say this could be us in a few years, because this is the problem. People have taken things for granted. You'll just think, well, you get paid leave, that's just what you do. Is it? Who says it is? It used to be the EU. Now it's not. Now it's entirely within the gift of the government. Which government do you want? The one that wants to take away those rights or the one that wants to strengthen those rights? So although the initial reaction to this news is going to be one of outrage for many, and I see it strategically, this is a bloody stupid move by Liz Truss. She's opened up a second line of attack on her government before it's even been formed, quite unnecessarily. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.